My overall cider making philosophy and approach, embracing an aspect of unpredictability, is kind of essential.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Bringing us into episode 468 of Cider Chat was Lee van DeWater of Pierrepont Cider, which is based in the town of Pierrepont, New York. He was talking about embracing unpredictability. I just love that. And it truly is an essential part of cider making, whether you are doing it like Lee does, which is unfiltered, no sulfites, wild ferments. You know, he's a forager. We're going to be talking about that. You have to really embrace the fact that that cider could go in a lot of different directions if, one, you don't pay attention, and two, the yeast, especially with a wild ferment, chooses to take on a certain characteristic that either you love or it's a little wonky. So yeah, embracing unpredictability is so absolutely, it's kind of hilarious, but it's oh so true. And that's why so many folks say that cider making has really, really helped develop patience for oneself, myself included. Anyways, we're going to be talking to Lee. He was the last cider maker, commercial cider maker on the tour that I took up to Vermont and New York. I've had, 4 episodes already. Part 1 was titled Czech Cider from Roadside Apples to Cellar Ferments, and that was with Dan Samek from the Czech Republic. He's based in Prague. Then part 2 was The Integrated Table, Cider Food and Farming at 1000 Stone Farm. That was featuring Kyle Duda and his wife Betsy Simpson, who is a Culinary Institute of America graduate. She is a chef at the Farm Hand Cider House and Kitchen. And then we had episode 466 titled Growing Cold Hardy Trees at St. Lawrence Nursery, also in New York. And that was with Connor and Alyssa Hardiman of St. Lawrence Nursery. Again, last week's episode, Canton Apples and Frosty Twig, New York Cider Makers Unite. So they've meshed these two brands together into one, and that's going to be something to be watching. And this week, just down the road from Canton, New York, is Pierrepont, and that is where Lee has his, it's almost like a studio type of setup. The site was originally a schoolhouse way, way, way back in the day, and now it's kind of like a ranch style, and the basement itself, the cellar, is this field stone, has a little bit of wetness in there, and that's where he has these oak barrels. And he's really doing everything by hand. He's foraging the fruit. And I'm always interested to speak with foragers, how you do that in a sustainable way as a cider maker. The question still remains. But right now, Lee is official and selling his cider. So he's doing something right. And of course, it's tasty cider too. So it's a win-win all around. We're going to be getting to that featured presentation with Lee van DeWater of Pierrepont Cider shortly. But first, as always, a wee bit of news from Mountain About in Ciderville. Welcome to Cider Chat. If this is your first time checking out this podcast, just so you know, I always start with a little bit of news out and about, and then we get into the feature presentation, and sometimes I leave a little bit at the end, and there's music in between, and all that music, pretty much for the most part, was written by myself and sung by myself with my cousin Jay playing the guitar and singing too. He's really kind of like a professional street musician. So that's what he does, and the two of us have been singing forever. So do check out the song at the end of this here episode. And with 10 seasons under the belt, we're kind of slowly getting up to 500 episodes. It's really good to know that all past episodes are archived and free to download. You could check them all out at ciderchat.com. There's a podcast tab. There are 50 episodes in each season. There's a little search bar. You put in a name of a cidery or an area, location, a country, and it will bring you to that podcast or a selection of podcasts. For instance, Vermont has a ton, New York, California, Michigan. We could go to the UK, France. So there's regions in the world that are really, really focused on cider. I haven't hit every country in the world, but maybe by I don't know what season 20 that will happen. This particular episode is, as I said, part of a series that I did as a cider road trip that I took this summer of 2025. But I also go on cider road trips too as cider tours. And if you're a regular listener, you know I've been talking up the UK cider tour, which right now I am in the midst of while this episode is going live. We're probably on the bus somewhere. They call it a coach in the UK. Heading out, let's see, what would this be on Wednesday? We would be, to the Black Cat Pub. Yeah, we're having a cider dinner there tonight with Nick. And I want to give a big tip of the glass to Colleen and James of Duck Chicken because they introduced me to the Black Cat. I didn't know about it, and it turns out it's a premier cider bar right in downtown Weston Supermar, which is on the Bristol Channel. So the water's right there. You have this magnificent view looking across the Bristol Channel, and I am a sucker for sunsets. So we're kind of like working out the dinner, so there's time for folks to run out and catch it if they can. Yeah, that's where we are today. Along with in the morning, we would be at Wilding Cider and then at Hedger's Cider for lunch before having dinner at the Black Cat Pub. So that's just one day in the life of anyone attending a Totally Cider tour. And I am so excited for this tour. So I'm glad to finally be on it while you're listening. Look at that. And what's really crazy is I've been kind of needing to acclimate between different time zones because right before going to the UK, I had to head out to California to go to my big brother's birthday bash. And that was like a luau. They closed the street down and it was crazy making. And that's one time zone. Then I headed back to the East Coast where I have my home base and then over to the UK, a totally different time zone. But, you know, when you are in the midst, and I know that you have experiences, right? When you are just like in the buzz and time is just kind of relative. You can somehow meet it. Though your body might be depleted, you could still somehow meet it. And one of the ways I do that is with electrolytes. I definitely take a little powdered electrolyte with me to mix into water to hydrate, and to really kind of keep that up. Because it's critical when you are a professional drinker like myself to make sure that you are maintaining your hydration. And something I recommend to all my tour guests to bring some kind of electrolyte. I mean, water is great. Water is good. Water is life. But you need a little bit more so you don't get those, hangovers or cramps. It's not good. It's not like we're kind of like sloshing it back all day long. Or are we? You have to do it in a judicious manner. And that's what I love about doing the cider tour. You don't feel like you're like at a cider fest and you have to like crank back every possible sip of something that's there. You have time to luxuriate over the experience. Anyways, that's what I am doing right now. I am luxuriating with folks from the US, Canada, Hungary, and Australia. We are in the UK enjoying it. So wherever you are listening to this right now, might be weeks or years later, just know at this moment, on this day, I'm actually thinking about you and raising a glass to the present and to the future and hoping always for cider going up. And right now I'd like to fast forward to February of 2026. The date would be February 2nd through the 5th for the upcoming CiderCon. And that's going to be held in Providence, Rhode Island, which is on the East Coast. And of course, the American Cider Association hosts this, and they do send out regular newsletters about all different things that they're involved in. And one of the things was this kind of new shift in the timing for CiderCon, in that typically it ends on a Friday, but now it's going to be ending on a Thursday. And it felt a little confusing. So I thought, there's nothing better than to speak to the CEO of the American Cider Association and find out what's up. So I rang Monica Cohen to help you and I understand what is this change about and what to expect for Providence in February of next year.
We got a lot of feedback that it would be better if we moved it to earlier in the week. Maybe some self-guided tours will be happening before, but for us, the week will start on Monday, February 2nd, with tours in Providence, the certified sommelier exam, the institute workshop, the boot camp will happen on Tuesday. Wednesday will be the opening session, which will be expanded this year, and CiderCon will happen Wednesday, February 4th through Thursday, February 5th. Hopefully ending with not just a grand toast, but a grand party, and then giving people kind of time to go home on Friday. If it works beautifully this year, absolutely will be the model going forward. If it doesn't work beautifully, then we'll change it.
All right, all you members of the American Cider Association who have been asking for this, I guess your wish has been granted. You will not have to worry about leaving on a Friday right after the grand toast to try to catch your flight home. So hopefully that'll make it easier for you. And I imagine if you're a member, you're going to keep on getting postings about this, so you'll be able to figure it out as you go along. And that one tour day is Monday that the ACA is hosting, and it sounds like all the tours are going to be just roundabout Providence. There's not going to be any overnight tours that the American Cider Association is offering. And of course, this is primarily for folks who are in the cider industry. CiderCon is not something that's open to the public per se, although often host cities such as Chicago do a banger of a job offering the Chicago Cider Week at the same time as CiderCon each year. It's just an incredible event. And other host cities have done this too, down in Virginia and also out in Portland, Oregon. So we're going to be seeing, everything's always ever evolving, just like the cider in your glass.
Walking through the orchards.
It's time now for our featured presentation with Lee DeWater. We're going to be hearing about his journey to cider and his cider making technique, which is essentially low intervention, and quite familiar if anyone is a forager out there, a home cider maker. This is exactly where a lot of us go to over time, is to really embrace the wild ferment. And of course, there's a couple things more involved in that, but I'll let you hear Lee describe to us exactly what he's doing there, making this a very good time now to grab a glass and join this chat with Lee DeWater of Pierrepont Cider, based in Pierrepont, New York. Lee, welcome to Cider Chat. It's really excited to be sitting across from you in person at your cidery in the works here. You got this building going on. You're at an old site I see outside that was an old schoolhouse location. So that always intrigues me historically. So how did this happen from like step one to step two? What's going on?
Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah, it's great to have you. Cider in some ways has been part of my life since I was a kid. My grandfather and great-grandfather were both apple growers and made cider, sweet cider. It's kind of wild in hindsight that there wasn't like fermented cider, hard cider was not a part of my childhood experience really, for whatever reason. But I grew up around the apple trees. I grew up pressing cider with the family, and it really wasn't until later on when I was of age and became a little bit more plugged into wine. I was working out west, gone to college out west, and was working for a food co-op actually, and started buying wine for them and started learning a little bit about wine, learning about cider as a wine made from apples. And the pieces started to sort of come together like, oh, I grew up around all these apple trees. I grew up around this cool culture of apples. And here's like a really neat value-added product that can come out of it and tell this story. So that's when it started to come together in Missoula, Montana. And another big influence there was actually Western Cider, who I think you've had the pleasure of chatting with. Yeah. Those guys were just getting started when I was living there.
So Michael and
Mike
his business partner.
I feel bad. Matt,
Michael and Matt, thank you.
Yeah, but they were just getting started with Western Cider when I was living in Missoula area. And I never actually worked for them. I think I applied once, but I saw them kind of open up, get started, just really make a splash with cider as like the main event in a way that I hadn't seen much before. Yeah. And so they were hugely inspirational, just like on a kind of like what's possible level. I obviously, you're here sitting in my little one-room shack basically, so I've gone in a different direction in some ways than they did in terms of like how they opened up and have like this kind of showroom for cider there that I love. Like right now I'm on the slow build version of that, and we're here I'm really teaching myself how to make cider as I get this cider business off the ground. And because my journey has been sort of so roundabout here and there in lots of different things.
So you're self-taught. Is that what you're saying?
I am self-taught. Like
and I just want to go back to your family, because we were hanging out last night with Dan Gallagher at Frosty Twig.
Mm-hmm.
And did I recall that your grandfather was making cider, or there was some like bootlegging going on? Or
no, that's over on the Bragg side.
Okay.
The whole other story. But no, the really cool connection with Dan and Joel at Canton Apples is Joel actually got his start in taking care of apple trees and making cider, working on the orchard that my great-grandfather planted in the 70s and 80s, which is no longer part of the family, doesn't own it, and Joel has a relationship with a new owner, but it's kind of a beautiful story because it's like it connects us on this deep level, and it's, I think you mentioned your love of the trees, and I think it comes back to that. Like the trees really drew Joel into cider making in a sense. Like to hear him tell it, as I recall at least, it wasn't like he set out to start a cider company, but he started taking care of this orchard, and kind of one thing led to the next, and here we are, 10 years later, and he's going into business with Dan, and there's all kinds of exciting stuff happening there. So I think of it, we talk a lot about mycelial networks and things like that. And I think there is a healthy underground apple tree culture happening here in the North Country. And you see Canton Apples and Frosty Twig as one fruiting body of it. And I'm over here looking a little different, in my different location, but, part of the same underlying culture, I think. Not to get too off into the deep end here.
No, well, you're making it, so in the end, it's you're getting the product in the bottle. Mm-hmm. So you are self-taught, and you also do foraging, quite a bit of foraging. I know you spoke at New York Apple Camp 2 summers ago. Let's talk about that sourcing.
Absolutely,
because there's a lot of orchards around here.
Yeah,
and you're a one-man business at this point.
I absolutely am. Yeah, just one person here, and I do almost all foraging. Sometimes I have the good fortune to forage trees that were planted, I guess is how I would put it. But most of the trees that I have access to are seedlings, are wild seedlings that I'm really, that talk about another learning curve. There's an incredible culture now, particularly in the Northeast, around seedling apples, and I'm learning so much from other people in Massachusetts and Vermont and Maine all the time, but just in my local neighborhood, really. In the last couple of years, I've really kind of narrowed my focus here to I forage only within the Little River Watershed, which is a pretty narrow little pocket of the Little River flows into the Grass River at the village of Canton, and it extends up here into the hills, and it's sort of a basin that I have made my boundary for foraging.
And I heard that there are kind of forager boundaries out here.
Well, that's part of it. Part of it is definitely
respecting other people's territory.
Respecting other people's spaces, and for me on a deep level, again, not to get too woo-woo with it, but there's this aspect of really wanting to be in relationship with the land, in relationship with the trees, and I think the water is a really essential part of that. We've known, we've been thinking a lot about water in the last decade. When I lived out west, I was involved in the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, and the thing back then was water is life,
Yes,
and that's still true. And so I really think about my relationship with the land and how I can reciprocate, because I get so much. The land here has given me a home, has given me a place to grow up and to raise my daughter, and gives me these apples every year. And so I'm still in the process of figuring out what that reciprocal relationship looks like, but I really do take very seriously my responsibility to the place where I forage, and I have a desire to elevate and showcase this place that I live and that I love, and to find a way to translate that. And I think cider is absolutely one of those sort of amazing things that can tell that story, that you can, and that can transport it. Like I could share my cider with somebody 1,000 miles away from here, and I think, or my ambition is that they would get a taste, they would get some sense of this place by having that cider.
Well, you mentioned last night as you were pouring this bottle from a specific tree. So let's talk a little bit about that cider. And before I get there, all wild ferment?
All wild ferment. Yeah, I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but I definitely, my introduction to wine and cider was kind of from the natural wine side of things. And I recognize that can sometimes be a controversial subject, but for me, in this self-taught space where I live, it was as much a pragmatic decision about what I had time to learn and what I felt like I had the capacity to kind of understand as anything. And I sort of decided if I do wild ferment, that's like one category of things that I'm going to kind of not worry about learning the different kinds of yeasts and how to manipulate things that way. I'm going to put my energy elsewhere. And there may come a time when I get more hands-on with some of that. But for now, yeah, it's all incredibly low intervention cider. You know, I don't pitch yeast. I don't use sulfites at press or bottling. I don't
No
filter.
sulfites at all.
No sulfites at all.
Added. Okay.
Which is not to say they couldn't exist.
Right.
Although so far I've been testing samples and I'm, you know, it's all pretty clean.
What are you fermenting in? What kind of vessels?
So as I've gotten a little bigger, it started out almost exclusively in glass, you know, kind of home cider maker,
5 gallon
carboys,
yeah,
and then into demijohns and some of that. But over the last few years, I've acquired a decent amount of stainless steel tanks, variable volume stainless steel tanks that I use. And in the last year, I've really made a commitment to trying to use neutral barrels in large part, again, just because practically speaking, they're the most cost-effective vessel that I can get to put cider in. I was initially very nervous about using barrels because they have a reputation for being kind of unpredictable, but with my overall cider making philosophy and approach, embracing an aspect of unpredictability is kind of essential. And I've been, for the most part, pleased with how barrels have worked out. The first 3 ciders that I did in barrel are the first 3 ciders that I'm selling. And to me, they're a bit heavy on the oak more than I would have initially liked, but that was the first run through on those barrels. So this year they're going to be toned down a little bit more. And other cider makers like Autumn at Eve Cidery, I remember early on when I first visited there, she said you have to use barrels. Like for some stuff, particularly wild stuff, the tannins and things need that breathing. They need that microoxygenation that you get from barrels to really get where they want to go. And
so are you embracing malolactic fermentation, which often happens in barrels because you need, especially with a wild ferment, it's in there so long. Imagine your period of fermentation, that conditioning's going for how many months?
A while, yeah. As a recently licensed cider maker, I don't necessarily want to go into the exact details of that, but it does typically spend, better part of a year in barrel.
Yeah.
I have had surprisingly little malolactic fermentation, in part because the cellar under here where it's fermenting is an old root cellar and it's very cool throughout the year. Okay. And so I haven't had a ton of really noticeable MLF. But that's one of those things, honestly, that like as a self-taught, relatively new cider maker, I don't know exactly what I'm doing there, and I may not always be recognizing it, but compared to, say, like Benford with floral terrains and Long Island, everything that he does in barrel goes through MLF because it's just a warmer part of the state, for one thing, and the space that they have to work with is a warmer space. And so for now, with my little root cellar, I've mostly not had that happening.
Is that the original cellar to the schoolhouse?
I don't think so, because the schoolhouse that the sign is for was like a log cabin schoolhouse in like the very earliest days. Because what's kind of crazy here is even though we're, in New York State and relatively close to other earlier settled areas, this area was not settled until really the mid 1800s. And it was actually Vermonters who decided Vermont was getting too crowded and too expensive. And so they came over the Adirondacks and settled in this area. But it was, it was pretty frontier country in those days.
Do you have a little bit of moisture in your cellar too? Because we're on the side of it.
Oh, definitely. This is a damp,
so
little damp, a little cool.
We'll get in there after we're talking here.
It's still a little rough around the edges, but it's nice for fermenting. It's been fun, and that's, you shared that cider or Perry from Wilding Cider in the UK, and they talk about the rural method. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I have any specific method, but I have found, a couple of those ciders we tried last night with some residual sugar. A piece of that for me is just cool cellar, small batches, and it's kind of happening a little bit accidental, a little bit deliberate, and I'm kind of trying to explore that space and figure out what I can do with it.
I'm curious, as you're foraging fruit, probably a lot that you don't know what type of apple it is. It's a roadside apple or somewhere in the woods, right? A seedling. And this is really for listeners out there who do a similar thing. You're like, I'm getting this apple tree here and I'm getting that one there. How do you organize that? Because that could be really overwhelming.
Yeah, I think like a lot of young cider makers who were strongly influenced by Andy Brennan and, his Uncultivated book.
New York State, yeah.
There's definitely a geographic aspect, like something that Andy does and Aaron Burr Ciders, his company, is he kind of groups his batches by geographic region, so all the apples collected in a given area going into one batch, so that batch is sort of expressive of a particular geography, elevation, whatever. And I do that to some degree just because I think that's the instinctual thing. Like, I live up kind of at the top of the basin around 1,000 feet. So I forage up there and I make a batch I call the Orbed Road batch, which is the road that I live on. And then there's this area here, Pierrepont Center, which is a little lower elevation, around 700 feet. And there's a lot of apples here. And so I tend to do a batch out of here. Then I usually do something from lower country apples going closer to Canton that are growing a little. And those have been kind of relatively consistent themes, using the sort of elevation, using the areas. But within that, I will also just take a single apple tree and follow it through from the tree to the juice right out to the bottle, so that you can sort of get a taste of this very specific tree. And that's really fun, and I love doing that. The problem is it's very hard to do that at any sort of scale. I mean, the most productive apple tree that I've done that with was maybe 20 bushels, and so made maybe 15 cases or something, which is on the very low end of being viable as like a...
But that's kind of a small batch cidery, which is...
Which is what I'm doing.
You're doing, right. Yeah. I mean, where are you looking to bring that then?
Well, I mean, a lot of that is just done for my own, because I've been sort of doing this for a few years without the license, just learning and things. And so some of those single tree batches are really fun and are exciting to learn from. But I think for the most part, except in a few cases where there's like a really awesome tree that seems to just hit every year with a good crop, where I can like reliably plan that, a lot of those are going to just be R&D, and eventually knowing the character of that fruit, I know, okay, I want to graft that, I want to propagate that tree. I also know its profile on its own, so I know what role it could play in a blend. And that is, the blending piece is something that I think that's another area where I have a lot to learn, and I see sort of those cider makers I look up to, Andy Brennan being another example, Autumn, the blend going into bottling is a really crucial piece. You talked about last night, balance over everything for cider. And I think balance is a lot of balance can come out of the blending process. I think it can be really tough to get a really balanced cider if it's just a single tree or a single varietal without kind of blending some. So that's somewhere I'm still learning. And again, that comes back to like the logistics of it. Like right now, I don't have a tank. My biggest vessel is like a 200 liter like stainless, so that's my batch size limiter.
Well, I mean, folks who, I don't know if they're still teaching it this way, the Peter Mitchell course was like, start with a 10 by 10 cidery, and I remember Ryder Ranch cider out in Santa Cruz Mountains, that's what was built, a 10 by 10, and everything was there, and making phenomenal ciders out of that. Yeah, so, you know, that's kind of like the beginning state of what many people could do, so you seem like you're spot on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've been, the goal has always been to grow this at a sustainable level, because I am a full-time stay-at-home dad for my 3-year-old and my partner works, but I have kind of limited time and limited resources. And so this is, there's still so far to go, but this has also been many years in development to get here. The good news on all of it is, we've gotten to this point without being deeply in debt on cider-related business, which is huge, because as much as I am confident in cider and love making cider and want to continue making it for my whole life, I don't feel always confident on the business end of things. And so I'm very mindful that I'm skirting maybe a dangerous line between passionate hobby and small business.
Right.
And I'm aware of the
There you
risks,
go.
and I'm really trying to be mindful of that, and not, because my goal is to be able to make cider for the rest of my life and to get to know these trees and to propagate more trees here and just, be part of this community and make cider as part of that. But if I boom and bust with the business, that's going to ruin my chances of being able to keep doing that. I think that is something that Andy kind of introduced into the conversation about cider pretty early on. How do you juggle this? How do you do this thing that you want to do and actually survive through the ups and downs of Mother Nature and your own life and all of that? So,
Lee, when did you actually get commercially licensed to sell, and how long have you been selling?
I have my official New York State microfarm winery as of April 11th of this year. I had a temporary as of October, I believe it was, last year.
Fantastic.
So we are brand new,
Congratulations.
sparkling new.
Not that you haven't been making cider for years,
No,
but the
but
fact that you could actually sell it now is huge.
Yeah,
And what
yeah.
is the different avenues that you're selling out of?
So right now, pretty much I've done some events over the winter with just a few things, but the big one for me is going to be the Potsdam Farmers Market right here in the St. Lawrence Valley. I'm there every Saturday, 9 to 2, doing bread with my friend and sort of co-business here, Earthbound Bread. I do his bread at the market as well. And then I had some bottles, I think they sold out at Aldiskeller in Rochester, and I'm interested in cultivating some other New York State wine shops, but it's a crowded field and I'm pretty far away, and I have a 3-year-old, so I haven't been beating the pavement to sell cider out more. And frankly, I'm still so new, I don't have a ton of inventory. But I'm looking forward to hopefully managing a hybrid model where I can have a core local audience, people that I'm working with, but also push stuff out further afield into New York State, because that's the beauty of being in New York is there are some pretty significant and pretty developed cider and wine markets in the Hudson Valley and the Finger Lakes, even all the way to the city. Last summer I went to ABV Ferments wine fair in Brooklyn, which is sort of like a Northeast natural wine get together, and I hope to go to some similar type of events, because that's, as much as I love cider and I'm deeply invested in it, I think business-wise, community-wise, in some ways, the Northeast natural wine scene is kind of where I find a lot of common ground and connection. That's a bit complicated because sometimes I feel like even in the natural wine world, cider is still the one in the corner, like the marginalized, but at the same time, I find people who are excited about hybrid grapes, people who are excited about non-traditional fruit wines tend to be very open-minded and excited about cider, and not just cider, but the range of weird stuff you can do with cider, co-ferments, et cetera, et cetera. And to be crass, people are willing to spend a little bit more on a bottle. Wine says sort of higher end. I don't see myself at this scale being able to compete with 1911 9-pin sort of larger
Well, that's like
scale.
a modern cider, which you're not.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're perfectly on track in that way. Let's talk about some of your ciders, because we went through a lot last night. I want to just tell Ciderville this experience. So we're out on this table, and it was kind of dark. There was no lighting, and all these bottles kept on coming out. Lee, he was standing over, and it was so dark. I wanted to get some videos of that, but he'd be cracking it open and popping that bottle, and a little spritz would come out, and then he'd be pouring it around, and it was one bottle after another. Let's actually start with the type of cider making that you're doing. Folks would think, oh, well, that's going to be like this wiggy out cider, and do I appreciate that style? I found your ciders really very tasty and
Thank you.
exciting, and had nice mouthfeel, a lot of complexity, brought you definitely on a journey in the bottle. And that's hard to do just in and of itself, and then to try to scale that up. So you had a lot of different product out on that table that we were tasting last night. One in particular had that label, which was one in particular was that single tree that you were really going on. So I
want more of it here. Brighter Later is what I call that one.
Yeah, let's talk about the
And
name.
you actually drove by that tree.
I did?
Coming here from town. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It just started blooming too. It's a late bloomer, but it's really hitting this year, so that's exciting. That's one that
there's a lot of trees on the way here.
You're here at a gorgeous time of year. As someone who loves apple trees and loves foraging, it's amazing. This time of year it feels like X-ray vision. They just sort of pop out. I'll spend the rest of the year looking for apple trees, but this window, this week window
This is
it. Like it's
Do you
where,
go around with like little, I don't know, surveyor tape?
no,
like
I put it all on. I have a GPS app that
Brilliant.
I have a map tagged of everything,
Okay.
and I also have property boundaries because property access is a huge other piece of this
foraging
puzzle.
and permission.
And that's relationships, community.
Yeah.
It really comes down to who do I need to get to be friends with to get to that apple tree. So anyway, we were talking about cider.
So going back to that particular cider, now is that one that's available for sale?
It is not yet. I'm working on label approval for that, and that one I hope to have out and about this summer at markets. That's a single tree cider. I have about 20 cases maybe of it. It's a fun one, and it's one that's been in blends previously because I hadn't gotten enough of it, but this year I was able to get enough of it to do a single batch of it. And it's fun because it's a late tree, and that's a big part of what learning the landscape here is, like which trees hang on to their fruit long enough for me to get to them, and those just by default become like my favorite trees often just because they're forgiving. Like the tree that has beautiful fruit but it drops in like a 2-day window in September, it's going to be really tough for me to capture that. The tree that holds its fruit into like November, that's like the first snow has come out and it's still holding all of its fruit, those are the trees that often that's great cider fruit, just like objectively speaking based on its qualities, but from a practical standpoint as a small cider maker, it's also doing you this huge favor of basically holding its fruit in like climate controlled storage.
Well, in November, that's pretty good.
So this is a very late hanging apple tree. I found it because the leaves were off everything else, and suddenly there was this like bright yellow spot on the hillside kind of across a field. And I was like, what is that? And then looking closer, it's like, that's a tree full of bright yellow apples, in November. It's gray everywhere else and just this spot of bright color. And so I went out and foraged it that year, went in a blend. Like some other cider apples or wild seedlings, it didn't immediately capture my attention taking a bite of it. The fruit itself was it wasn't an eating apple. I wasn't like, I want to eat a bunch of these, but it also didn't really like scream, oh, this is a cider apple. But it's one that just kind of grows on me. And I think it actually is one of those cases where it feels like the fermentation actually brings out a level of complexity in the fruit that might not even be there at first. And that's what's so mind-blowing about this like seedling apple culture that we're kind of growing here is there's so many different aspects of it. There's the way the tree grows, like what kind of conditions it can handle, and that kind of magical like climate resilience part of like these trees have this like toolbox of skills for surviving conditions that some of our conventional trees don't. But then there's the whole other piece of, okay, what's the fruit like? How do we harvest it? How does it ferment? Like, what does it do? And there's this huge expanse that we can explore in and learn about. And sometimes it feels a little daunting because there's just like so much out there, and there's only so many of us like doing it. But it's also incredibly,
but you're doing it.
Yeah, and it's the joy is really just in the work. It's not like, I don't think we have some like, oh, we've achieved our goal. We found the perfect apple. Like, the perfect apple doesn't exist. It's the journey to find the perfect apple that's that's going to keep us going. So
now there was one cider after about 15 or 20 ciders later, and it was in the pitch black. So I think I poured something in my glass from you, but it was, remember, I stood up and I said, "This is a Perry," and you said, "It's not a Perry, it's an apple." And what was special about that is we had been drinking a lot of cider, obviously, and Perry, and that made me pause that particular bottle. Can you tell me about that one? Because I was like, that is a damn good cider.
That's one that, a happy accident in a way. It's 3, I believe, seedling trees from this one property, a friend of the family's. There's a ton of apple trees, but these 3 in particular had a really good year that year. And I gathered their fruit and blended them, pressed them together. And, it's that expression of place. Like it really captured something there. The fruit had the balance piece too, that something in just those 3 trees was able to kind of come together into a nice, well-balanced cider.
Are they all like close together?
Fairly close, yeah. And they were like, there's always kind of the scraggly little guys like creeping in the edges. And these were, and this is where, I say they're seedlings, but I honestly don't know the deep history of the place. Like they were confident, strong seedlings with nice central trunks in thick undergrowth. If they were planted, it was a long, long time ago. But it's possible. It's certainly possible. And that's
You're
that's
not
part
seeing
of
any graft or anything like that?
No, not seeing a graft, and the fruit doesn't check out. But I don't know.
And what does the fruit look like itself? Is pretty clean, or is it like a little ugly apple that?
Yeah, no, I mean these were, and that's another piece of the foraging puzzle is like sometimes I go for the tree with just a nicer, bigger fruit because I can collect more of it more efficiently.
Sure.
And these 3 trees were all trees that had a decent, like, medium-sized fruit that was pretty easy to collect. I think one has a nice striped, like a red streak stripe kind of vibe. One was a yellow apple, and one was actually a russet, like a pretty nice full coverage russet, but clearly not a golden russet, like a little smaller, a little bit weirder. But they were just 3 beautiful trees, and they somehow, they knew that they wanted to get together.
And they did, boy,
They
in the
did,
bottle.
yeah.
I mean, it really was well balanced, the complexity.
I think there's like a hint of fructose kind of thing that you get, like that. Sometimes, like that other sweetness that's like from Perry almost. Like, I don't know.
It did have like the overtures of pear, but again, just truth be told, we were drinking a lot of cider, but it was enough. I approach it from the feeling aspect, and my body went, damn, this is like calming me, after a late night, and for a cider to stand out after so many ciders later, that said something to me.
That I think it does come back to, in wine people talk about this a lot, like intention is more involved. I mean, there's the whole happy accident thing is part of it. There's definitely a random element and an uncontrolled thing, but then there is something about certain ciders I can tell as they're coming together that kind of works. And it's not some magical thing. It's also like in the process of making it, I start to tune into that and start to think this is one that needs just that extra care. And so then some of that is a feedback loop of like, this is starting to feel like a special cider. I'm feeling like it's a special cider. I'm going to put a little more extra love and attention and direction into that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the areas that I'm really interested in. Can I translate that? Because that often happens in these pretty small batches where I'm like, ooh, this is really it. Can I bring that level of intentionality and sort of getting these elements to align? Can I bring that to bear in bigger batches, more commercial scale batches? And that's the fun challenge, I guess, is figuring that out. Because it can be tough when you're dealing with a larger amount of juice to have that same feeling of like the stars aligning. Because there's sometimes...
I mean, let's face it, the type of cider making you're doing takes a level of commitment and just like grit, downright grit to kind of keep it going. Versus if you have an estate cidery, there's a reliability that isn't part of this business plan.
Yeah.
You're dealing with homeowners, property owners that can change over time. And then you have, I remember Ansha in Hungary, this beautiful yellow apple tree like the one you're talking about earlier. And, the woman, I think she passed on there. She was in her 90s. So then what happens to that apple tree?
Yeah, no, it's sad. I see them go sometimes. But
yeah.
The beautiful thing though is, there's less reliability, but there's more room for magic potentially, or maybe magic isn't the right word.
No, I like magic with cider. I think it totally happens.
Yeah,
I believe it.
And with the approach that I have, there's a chance for that. And I've had some really magic bottles. That was definitely up there in those. And I've...
Is that cider going to be available for sale?
No, that's a seller. Sorry,
I'm sorry, but
that's
there's
a seller
other ciders.
selection.
There's a lot,
And I'm
about
going to
10
keep
others.
I'm going to keep sort of chasing the magic, and not every bottle necessarily is going to be it, but a lot of it too. I mean, you said, "Oh, all your ciders are great." Well, I didn't bring out the ones that aren't great. That's a certain amount of the process. A certain amount of the process is definitely like, oh, well, that didn't resolve the way I was hoping it would. Yeah. That one goes in the vinegar vat, or that one's for family can drink that one, whatever.
Right. Well, what is available? This podcast we're recording now in May, and it'll be going live late this summer. What would be available?
Yeah, I may still have the tail end of my kind of initial releases. These aren't even labeled. White label. These are just my very first barrel aged. There's 3 of them. White, pink, gold top, wax top, still.
So you're not really naming it. You're just doing it like color.
Yeah, this was my like in records, like in DJ stuff. You get your like white labels. That's like before it's out on this is like. These were just kind of what I had available when I first got the license, and I put them in a bottle. And I think I think they work. I think they're fun, but the still cider niche is like a small niche in an already niche kind of field.
And that's what you're doing. All your ciders are all still. That's not what I experienced.
No, that's what I was going to say. These are
Okay.
still, by the time this hits the airwaves, I should have one that we tried last night, that 2024 Pet Nat, that I'm excited about. I think that you kind of said it had like a nice lemony kind of vibe.
Yeah.
It's still young and developing, but that one should be labeled and out for wider release by midsummer, hopefully. I'll have that single tree one, Brighter Later, will be labeled and out that you tried. And Orbed Road 2024 should be hitting the streets by the fall. I'm bottling it right now, and it'll need some time to condition. I have a maple sap ciderkin, which we'll see how this batch comes out, but that's one that I've been playing around with. I don't know if you've ever tried. Can't remember. I had some of a previous batch at Cider Camp. A New York Cider Camp a couple years ago. I don't know if you tried it, but there's a Quebec maker, Turbulence. They're north of Vermont and Quebec, and they make a maple sap ciderkin as well that they call Pompette, and it's a very specific, cool, like North Country Quebec style of things.
So maple sap.
Yeah. So what I do is I freeze the pomace in the fall. So like I'm grinding, I press a batch, typically something like high sugar, something with a lot of extra umph in it, and I put it in buckets and I freeze it over the winter. Then when the sap starts to run again in the spring, usually like February, March is when the maple trees start running, and I tap. I mean, we always tap trees anyway. We don't have a commercial sugaring option, but we have. So I tap the trees, and most of our sap goes into the fire to boil to make syrup, but I save some off and I use that sap to then rehydrate the pomace sap, rehydrate it with the maple sap rather than water, which is what traditionally you would do with ciderkin. And it's pretty subtle difference, but there's something distinct about it. And there's a little bit of sweetness in the sap, so that helps hopefully the ciderkin along. And I don't know, if you've ever had fresh maple sap from the tree, it's got a certain something.
It sure does.
And certainly like an energy and a story. So that's a product. I'm a little nervous about this batch that I've got bottle conditioning right now. I'm not sure if it's going to get to wide release or not, but...
Would you want that to be sparkling?
Yeah. I mean, so ciderkin's like a light
How would you
fizzy.
do that? Do you force carbonate then in that case?
No, I would just bottle condition. So what I did on these is I added some maple syrup back to it when I was going to bottle it. So ideally,
or B grade,
very B grade. I mean, we do it over an open fire. So our maple syrup tends to have a little smokiness.
So you're making your own maple syrup to to condition it.
So so I condition it with some syrup and a little bit of a more active batch of cider.
Does that have a little bit of smoky overtures in it?
Hopefully. Well,
if you're doing that over an open fire, and just for folks listening in other parts of the world, when you're making maple syrup, you're collecting the liquid, the clear liquid, and then boiling it down.
Yeah, and it's 40-1, so you got to boil for a long time.
40 gallons to 1 gallon
of syrup.
End product that it all boils down to. And there's different grades. A grade is the higher grade. I always really liked B grade, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, because, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But the idea that A grade is better is only because in the old days, people were trying to make it like white sugar. They wanted like the most neutral flavor, and now it's like if you're getting maple syrup, you want it to taste like maple. That's the whole point. So that's why they actually got rid of A and B. Now it's dark amber, light amber. They got because the hierarchies were.
But what you're doing over the open fire reminds me of being in Normandy and seeing them doing a distillation. And in that case, a lot of makers are going now to gas power. But if you're in a room where there's all that smoke, I think we're losing something in the flavor when you go to the more petro-based burn, because that smoke in the air in that room with that liquid dripping out, it's infusing into it. So kind of cool. That'll be interesting. I'd like to follow up on that ciderkin.
It's definitely going to be an ongoing project.
Yeah,
so if this year doesn't hit, I'm going to keep exploring. Because like I said, this Quebecois cider maker, they do one that you can actually find it in shops in Montreal, and it's really great. It's like it's maybe 3%, 2-3%, very low, but they get a nice fizz. They do it as a pet nat, and I think that's long-term what I would prefer to do. This batch got away from me and kind of went to still, so I had to try to do it again.
Got so much going on here, yeah.
But, I as far as, that storytelling piece, the maple is a huge part of our cultural identity here. So finding a way to incorporate the maple into the cider in some way without too heavy-handed sweetness, because I'm really not I'm not keen on a really heavily back sweetened cider at all. But it's fun to play around with it. So
now most of your bottles are 750 milliliter, and I've seen there's two different versions. You have the classic like wine bottle.
Yeah, these were just what I could get on short notice when I needed to bottle. Your classic grain Bordeaux bottles, but
and that's with a cork. But then, are you moving primarily to
crown caps? Mostly crown caps. I honestly, Ryan from Scrumpy U Cider sold me a corker a couple years ago because I wanted glass, and I drove a trailer down to pick up some leftover like bottles that he had, and he was like, I'll throw in this corker for a good deal. And so then I was like, what am I going to do with this? And then this year I ended up having a couple barrels of still cider, and I used the corker, and I don't know, I think as a very natural winemaker, I feel a little more confident when I'm bottling under crown cap with expected CO2 pressure, because I feel like that's like a nice little security blanket. If I bottle it and it's still active and I can feel like it's gonna condition, that like makes me feel good. So I don't know. The cork thing is, the dream I suppose would be to do champagne cork style, the cork and cage, but I don't have that set up, and I'm back and forth. I think too much about little details, and bottling and packaging and formats and all of that is definitely.
There's a lot of little details. There's a lot of little details,
and how to present yourself.
Yourself
when you're such a small producer. It's really. I do think it's really important to think about presentation, but at the same time, that's not my personal passion. Graphic design is not necessarily why I got into making cider. I'm lucky to have my partner, Nicole, has a bit more confidence in that realm, and so we're going to continue to collaborate on that.
That's great when you have that perfect fit there, because this is all about steady on in a climate where small businesses are really overwhelmed to begin with, and then now you're dealing with Mother Nature and so many factors. The fact that you're even doing it is like, bravo, tip the glass for that, because it ain't easy, and well, for so many reasons.
There's been some really great, I think, leaders, kind of inspirations, and the cider community, as you know probably better than anyone, is incredibly welcoming and generous and supportive in a way that I think helps people like me on their way. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a vague idea that I wanted to make cider, and I really just kind of jumped into it.
Was there something that you were doing beforehand?
Well, I was managing a food co-op. I was working for cooperative extension here, and various things around local food and stuff, and
quality, the vitality of the landscape.
And it was always in the background of like, oh, it'd be really cool to do this cider thing. But then I think probably like a lot of people, it was kind of the pandemic thing took something that was like, we'll get to that eventually, and made it like, well, I guess
do it now.
We better just do things now, because who knows, the world might be ending.
Well, the sense I get from you is, and this is true for so many folks that I interview, that you just really enjoy this, and that will then carry through into the bottle. And so listeners who aren't sitting across from Lee as I am right now, I want you to know this guy is really passionate. And we're having a shorter conversation, but he's really super engaging, and each bottle has a story, each tree has a memory, and that's what's going to be poured into your glass. So I really recommend that you check out Pierrepont Cider up here in upper
the
state,
North Country.
The North Country. Okay, period. Just the North Country, not upper New York State, because it's upper New York State.
If you say upstate, that's way
that's
south
not
of us.
Real, right?
What does Joel say on his north of upstate?
Right, north of upstate. Yeah.
I would just identify as North Country more than anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. In an area, finally you're creating an oasis for cider aficionados and just people who love the apple and are looking for that perfect glass in a region that is kind of pretty far and few between. If you come here, you come for a reason, and I really recommend that you do, because it is spectacular out here.
Well, and if you're on your way to Canada, we're only an hour and a half south of Ottawa, Ontario, and so if you live in Ottawa and you're hearing this, hit me up, come by, let's hang out and drink some cider.
Perfect. Hey, thanks a lot for being on Cider Chat.
Thanks for coming by, and safe travels. on your way, on your journey.
Thanks, Lee. One thing for certain on the cider road trip through Vermont and New York, each cider business had its own model, its own way to make it work. And Lee is no different, and I really wish him the best of luck. I think he has the infrastructure set up, and now it's just kind of like doing it. And yeah, we know, certainly anyone who makes cider, that it's a lot of work. But if you have the passion, if you have the community surrounding you, it is doable. And I hope you get a lot of inspiration from this series that I've been rolling out. After my visit with Lee, I headed that same day down to Ticonderoga, which is on the west side of Lake Champlain. And I was heading to the inn at Lake Champlain. On the way there, I was driving through the Adirondacks. And I'll tell you, I don't really remember myself ever visiting that area. I think in my entire lifetime, which is kind of crazy, but maybe I did. But it was really something to behold. All this water everywhere, and I did get a little stop along the way to just enjoy a really beautiful lake, stream scene in the mountains there. And then it was this really steep downward climb to Lake Champlain and to the inn at Lake Champlain, where I spent the night with Carl and his family. Carl and his family moved from Ohio to the Ticonderoga area and took on this beautiful bed and breakfast. And he is building up a commercial cider operation too. And we had some of his homemade cider. It was delicious. So we'll be following his journey along as that slowly keeps moving. And as you hear in Cider Chat, it does take a little bit of Oompa Loompa to kind of keep it going and keep the faith in your own cider and your ability to do it all. But I have really high hopes for the inn at Lake Champlain. I know it's going to happen there for sure. Anyways, that's it. That is the end of my journey that I took in May of 2025 and brought you through this summer. Really excited to finally get all these episodes out. It was a fantastic time to be there. I was out around May 12th, and it was peak blossom season for that north region, which is just to know if you are in a particular region, you're like, oh darn, I missed the apple blossoms. Go north. And it's interesting now in the fall where we have peak fall foliage, and New England is just absolutely spectacular for that. It does it in reverse pattern. The foliage starts in the north, and then the season slowly comes down to the south. So if you are up in upstate, you would have your foliage earlier, and we get the foliage, the peak time, later. It's just a beautiful world, isn't it? And because of that, I hope you, like me, are enjoying it out there. As always, if you get value from this podcast, please do hit the donate button at ciderchat.com or become a patron at the Cider Chat Patreon page. And with that, I leave you here. This is Ria Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Oh yes we do. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There's a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh, yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palms.
Oh, yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!